story called King Maen's Secret, and it begins with a song. King Maen had a terrible secret. King Maen had ears like a horse. He kept them hidden underneath his crown because when he would take the crown off, the ears would shoot up through his hair. Bing! And if anybody saw them, they would gasp. So King Maen kept his crown on all the time. The only time he took it off was to have his annual haircut. And then it was always the same. He would take off the crown, the ears would go bing, and the barber would gasp. But then he'd get the scissors and he'd give the king his haircut. But then the king would send the barber far, far away into a deep, dark prison, because you see, in those days, you could not be king unless you were physically perfect, and, well, horses' ears did not qualify. So, well, after a while, people noticed that barbers would cut the king's hair, and, well, then they were, you know, hair today and gone tomorrow. And so after a while, nobody wanted to be a barber in Ireland anymore, and the only way they could get someone to cut the king's hair was by lottery. Well, one year it happened that an old woman, a widow, with only one son, her son was chosen to cut the king's hair. When she found out about it, she went and she begged him, "Oh, please, your majesty, don't send my son away. He's the only one I have in the whole wide world." And King Maen felt sorry for her. So he said, "Well, all right, you send the lad to me. I need to talk to him." And so the young man came in, and the king said, "Now, young man, when I take off my crown, you're going to see something unusual. Do you swear on the sun and the moon and the stars that you will never tell another human being what you see when I take off my crown?" And the young man said, "Oh, yes, your majesty, I swear on the sun and the moon and the stars and my mother's old gray head, I will never tell another human being what I see when you take off your crown." And so the king said, "All right then." He reached up, he took off the crown, and the ears went bing! And the young man gasped. But then he got the scissors, he gave the king his haircut, and all was well for a while. But you know how it is when you have a secret. It was all he could think about. The young man couldn't eat, he couldn't sleep, he was getting weak. His mother took him to the doctor, to the herbalist, but finally, she took him to the oldest and wisest woman in their village. She said, "I know exactly what you need." And she took him out to the middle of the deep, dark forest. And in the middle of the deep, dark forest, there was a willow tree with long, graceful branches and a knothole just here. She said, "Now, young man, you whisper whatever it is that's troubling you into that tree, and you will feel better." And the young man thought to himself, "Well, I promised not to tell another human being," but he didn't say anything about trees. So he whispered into the tree, "King Maen, has ears like a horse. And just like that, he felt so much better, and all was well for a while. The king had a harp player. And one day the harp player was out on his horse. He had his little harp strapped to his back, and as they were going along, something frightened the horse. It reared up, he fell off. He was not hurt, but the harp was broken right in two. And so now he had to go out to the middle of the deep, dark forest. And when he did, he found a willow tree with long, graceful branches and a knot just here. That's the perfect tree for my new harp. He cut it down, he took it back to the castle, he made it into a beautiful new instrument, and the king invited everybody to come and hear the new harp. They ate and they drank, and afterwards the harp player sat down, but when he did, a strange thing happened. The harp began to sing all by itself. Oh, the king has a secret he hides 'neath his hair. If you pull off his crown, you'll see what is there. And I am a harp, so I tell truth, of course. Oh, the king has a secret. He has ears like a horse. Everybody in that room was staring at King Maen. And King Maen just stood there. He wanted to run, but there were guards at the door, and besides, he was king. He couldn't do that. He thought to himself, well, I'll have them all sent away to a deep, dark prison. But he couldn't do that. That wouldn't be right. So finally, he did the only thing he could do. He reached up, he took off the crown, and the ears went bing! And everybody gasped. But then one little child broke away from his mother. He ran up and he said, "Oh, please, Your Majesty, are your ears very soft like a horsey's?" And the king said, "Yes, they are. Would you like to see?" And he bent down, but then he stood right up and he said, "No, wait a minute. I've done a terrible thing." And he called to his guards. He said, "Go, get all the barbers out of the prisons." And then he called to his treasurer, "Get bags of gold, give them to the families to compensate them for what I've done." And, well, from that time on, the people of Ireland decided that they would rather have a king who did the right thing than one who was physically perfect, whatever that means. And so King Maen remained the king. And sometimes he wore his crown, and sometimes he did not, and sometimes he just lifted it off so his ears would go bing! And all was well.